welcome to A Good Walk Spoiled Adventures in Golf with your host, Scott Ponywaz, also known as Pony Golf. A Good Walk Spoiled is part of the Millions.co and Golfer Gang networks. Thank you for tuning in. Let's swing into this week's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of A Good Walk Spoiled. My name is Scott Ponywaz and I am the host, also known as at Pony Golf. Today's episode, I have Eric DeGotti on the episode, and he is a performance fitness coach, trainer, instructor. He's been in fitness industry for over 25 plus years. But what's going to make this interview a little bit more unique is that for some reason my podcast recording software did not record and save my half of the footage and the recording for the actual episode. So, Eric, great guest. We had some great conversations. Unfortunately, and I'm going to preface this all, I am kind of re-recording to the best of my knowledge the way that the questions were asked. So if certain parts from my side sound a little weird, I apologize. I'm going to try to recreate the question as best as possible. But Eric was awesome at talking through his side of the story, and I think you should be able to get enough of the gist out of this episode without us having to record the episode again. And I just want to preface that all. I apologize. I hope this never happens again. So if Riverside FM is listening, I don't know what happened with your recording software, but it completely glitched out and none of my side saved because they do basically multiple track recordings. Luckily, we got all of Eric's saved, and it is a great conversation, great information for those of you out there wanting to focus on your fitness. And I think you'll catch, I'm joking here before our conversation started that basically I personally want to spend more time, but for some rhyme or reason, it never catches up as far as my focus when I'm balancing work, life, all of the golf training that I do on top of that. And so without further ado, I am going to introduce you to Eric. He recently launched the Ageless Athlete Blueprint through Eterno Athletics. He really focuses a lot on competitive males over 40 looking to still train and compete at a high level. So golfers out there, you can check out Eric's website as well, ericdegatti.com, ERICDAGATI. I will drop a link to that in the description as well. And without further ado, let's get into letting Eric introduce himself.
Thanks for having me, Scott. And you're unfortunately not alone in that you've kind of disregarded this aspect of your game. But with all due respect to our friends at Titlest and TaylorMade and all the big companies, the most important piece of equipment you bring out on the course is the one you look at in the mirror. And that's the one we usually disregard the most. And so my background as a performance, and strength and conditioning coach is trying to problem solve, is to figure out what is it that's holding somebody back from being their best, whether it's staying healthy and or if it's where is the flaw in your game, and then having kind of a systematic approach of figuring out, okay, well, what is it? So if you met me, at a bar tonight and you said, hey, can you give me a program to improve my golf game? I'm probably going to give you a bad guess on it, right? I don't know why, your game's suffering. And so that's why we have systems like TPI and some of the other systems that I use to figure out, what is it that's kind of holding you back. And there's some things for general fitness that everybody could probably improve on. And then from there's some stuff that's pretty specific to the unique demands of golf that we can certainly go into the weeds with today.
So I asked Eric here, you've done some work with Tim Ferriss. As an entrepreneur myself, very impressive. It was for, I believe, the 4-hour body, not the 4-hour work week. So Eric, I asked here, how did that all come about?
4 Hour Body. So 4 Hour Body, yeah. Tim came to me and had a movement screen done for as part of the 4 Hour Body investigation process.
And here, I'm pretty sure I asked Eric, okay, so how did Tim Ferriss seek you out? Did he just walk in one day, or how did this involvement in his project come to you?
So I've been working with a company that's affiliated with TPI, a company called Functional Movement Systems, and I've been a lead instructor for them, teaching workshops on how to evaluate functional movement to coaches, trainers, clinicians all over the world for over the last 15 years. Well, when Tim was writing his book, he was doing a whole section on movement, and Gray Cook, the founder of Functional Movement Systems, had given him a program to work on, talked about the movement screen and so forth. And he said, well, I need to experience this. So he said, I'm in New York. Who do you have? And Gray said, well, it's perfect. One of my top guys is right there. So, he sent out, he said, this is back in the days when you got a cab. Uber didn't even exist. And Gray calls me and says, listen, you have to do me a solid. I got this New York Times bestselling author coming out. He needs to get screened. And I had no familiarity. I didn't know about the 4 Hour Work Week at the time. And I'm expecting some guy with horn-rimmed glasses and a white goatee to walk in. Meanwhile, I got a guy in Vans and board shorts comes walking in. And he's like, yeah, tell me about this movement screen. And so I put him through it. And he said it was kind of cool because I had discovered a lot of things that he had been dealing with for years. Gave him some exercise to work on, and I thought that was a cool experience. I went and read 4 Hour Work Week, and then I realized kind of what a cult-like following Tim had, not knowing that he was writing this book because he didn't tell anybody. Fast forward maybe a year or so, we get a call at my facility and saying, I got a guy who's insistent on seeing you. At the time, I wasn't taking on any new clients, and and so he kept begging and begging. We got him on my schedule. He comes in, he's like, you're the guy. And I said, well, I guess. And he said, yeah, page 237, whatever page I'm on. And he points it out. I'm like, holy shit. Like, this is, I can't, he had written a whole section on the movement screen and mentioned me. And so it was kind of a cool experience. It's all kind of along the way. And a lot of it's been just kind of word of mouth and referral. And also, in the sports world, a lot of it is trying to keep up with the Joneses. And that if you have a technique or some sort of intervention that has some success somewhere, they're going to want to not fall behind, whether they're trying to attract a free agent or whether they're, trying to keep up with somebody they're competing for a spot with, they're going to want to try to get that thing. And so whether it's the movement screening, whether it's the type of, performance training, those are kind of things that I've been attached to that kind of brought people in, have people bring me in to either work with them individually or work with an organization to say, okay, well, where are kind of the blind spots that we're missing here? How can these certain techniques help us out? And either one of those big two, reducing our injuries and keeping people out there playing and competing, or like what are we missing performance wise? That's it was really just seeing the void that was out there. A lot of, even unfortunately today, 25 years into doing this thing, it's a pretty low barrier for entry for the masses. In that, if, like I said, if you walk into any facility and say, I'm a golfer and I want to improve my game, they're going to immediately start having you do a bunch of rotational exercises and throwing a ball against the wall. And they're going to do a lot of things that look like golf. And that may or may not improve your golf game, and it may or may not make you less prone to injury. If anything, it may hurt you if you're not prepared for those things. And so it's always been a very generic, what I call this for that type of mentality. And seeing kind of the flaws in that, I've always kind of gone contrarian to that and said, I need more of a systematic way that when, Scott walks through the door, I got to first look at Scott, not Scott the golfer. And so if you miss that step, you can, I may sometimes skip steps, as my mentor told me, but I'll never miss steps. And because you need to have a system for that. And that's where things like, you mentioned TPI or these things kind of figure out, and it helps dissect what is the problem and really whose problem is this? And that's really what segue into what the TPI model is for the people not familiar with it. Titlest Performance Institute was started by Dr. Greg Rose, who's a chiropractor by trade, who was working with a lot of golfers and wanted to kind of create this system for building better health and performance in golfers. And it's based on kind of a three-pronged model, in that there's the skill component, there's the medical component, and then there's the performance component. All right, so golfer comes in, and let's say we have a golfer who's got hip or low back pain, which is about as common as you could find. And then you say, okay, well, where's the problem here? Is it possibly a problem in the swing? Or like, are they creating this problem with a mechanical flaw in their swing? So we have a systematic way to look at your efficiency of your swing and see, is there anything that you're doing that's inefficient that could potentially be putting additional stress in these certain areas. Then the second component is a movement screen to look at, well, maybe you don't have the ability to do what you're asking your body to do in that golf swing, what we call the body swing connection, and say, okay, you're asking your body to do something it doesn't have the capability to do. And so now you're kind of forcing a square peg into a round hole, and that's what's creating the issue there. And that could be a movement problem, or maybe there's a medical issue here, and how do we go about treating it? And then how do we get the athletic trainer or the physical therapist or whoever the medical staff is on the team, working with the performance strength coach and working with the skill coaches, so we're all on the same page and figuring out, well, whose problem is this? Sometimes it's all of ours together, sometimes it's one of ours, sometimes it's a combination. So by having that objective system, you can filter out a lot of stuff, right? So let's say you're working on your swing, and you're finding that you're having an issue with sway. Every time you go to your backswing, your hips are just drifting. And so your coach you look online and you see all these drills on social media, and they're attaching pool swimmies, and they're attaching rubber bands, and they're attaching all these things to you, and until they realize that, you know what, this person can't rotate their hip inside the socket. They have no choice but to sway. And so you can hook up every apparatus you want. It doesn't matter. They physically don't have the ability to get there. Now, you have one of two options. You work on changing their physical ability, and sometimes you may not be able to do that. That's where the medical part comes in. Or you have to alter the swing to make up for it. And so having the ability to understand that means you save a whole lot of time on drills that you just are never going to be successful in, and trying to fix a flaw that you're never going to overcome unless you either change your movement or change your swing.
So as a follow-up question, I asked Eric, you've also done a lot of work with pro athletes over the years, and baseball, basketball, I believe football, some other Navy SEALs. How do you end up being the name that comes up in conversation, and how do you get referred to, say, Olympic gold medalists or All-Americans and World Series baseball players?
That's it depends answer. And so it depends on what you're lacking most. So if you kind of look at, there's multiple buckets that go under the umbrella of fitness. And you mentioned some of them. There's your movement competency, like how well can you move? And that within that, there's mobility and flexibility, and then there's also control and stability. A lot of times we don't decipher that well. I can't tell you how many times people say, oh, can you give me some stretches for golf? And my first reply to them is, well, how do you know you need stretches? Right? Maybe I could actually stretch you and make you worse. Like, if you want a surefire way for me to ruin your game, have me show up. And this is something that I would get asked to do early in my career. Have me show up at your next outing and just stretch everybody right before they go out in the course. And it's real common that you see it all the time. And there's no better way to screw up everybody's game than give them a whole bunch of range of motion that they've never had, that they don't know what to do with, and they didn't learn their golf swing around. And so best, you'll play the worst round of your golf that you've ever played. At worst, you're going to end up seizing up your back about 9 holes in because you don't know how to control all this new range of motion that I gave you. So, just to say, oh, well, I need to stretch because I feel tight. Well, there may be a reason that you're tight, and your body's sometimes smarter than you are, and it's protecting you. And that what feels like tight hamstrings may be the only thing that's stabilizing your pelvis. And now I go and take that away from you by stretching you out before you go play. And now you got nothing to stabilize it. Well, thanks for nothing. So that's where we look at the component of how well you move. Then there's strength. And then different from strength is power, right? There's a certain point where you're strong enough. Now everybody can benefit from strength, but there's a certain point where, like, if I took you from a a 400-pound deadlift to a 500-pound deadlift, I don't know if it's going to get you that much better in your game, especially if you don't coincide that with power. The difference with power is there's a time component, right? You're trying to swing this long metal shaft really, really fast. And we know that the faster that thing goes, provided you make good, clean impact, the further the ball's going to go. So power is much more of a nervous system driven ability. And so we have to look at your ability to be explosive. Then within that, you also have to have a good base of just being fit, right? And so you don't gas out on hole 14. So we need to have a base of fitness, and that kind of is the development of your aerobic system. And then along with all that, you have to also look at your ability to then translate that into skill. And that's where we get into, if we want to really go down a rabbit hole and you want to talk about how you sequence your body, all right, and how efficient you are. Okay. So we want to dive into that. Okay. All right.
So here, as I recall, I asked Eric sort of how he got into golf and TPI specifically, and then also the over 40 age group, I believe. So he'll fill you in, but good content here.
Okay, so one of the big components, we look at this through the TPI model, but it really translates to any rotational sport, is looking at sequencing is, okay, you could be the biggest, strongest, most powerful human being in the world and still not be able to get anything behind your drive because you're incredibly inefficient, okay? Because you don't sequence in it properly. And you can have people that are in the tee box next to you who are bombing the ball. And you're like, hey, I don't understand. For me, as someone who's had a background in lifting for all these years and bodybuilding, all that stuff, I'll go to the driving range and the guy next to me will be 40 pounds lighter and just actually out driving me by 50 yards. And it doesn't make sense. Go to the gym and I'll run circles around this guy because he's much more efficient. He doesn't waste any energy. And the sequencing we look at, anything you do rotational starts from the ground. And then what happens is you transfer that energy up through your pelvis, out through your trunk, through your shoulders, and then finally out to your hands. And so when you look at the rotational, not only just the rotational, but the lateral and vertical components of your swing, it initiates in the ground. But basically what happens, you initiate by starting with your pelvis, starting this kind of tornado-like effect that's going to happen. So your pelvis starts, and then after that comes your trunk. So imagine your rib cage and your upper back all kind of, and then your shoulders come after that. And then after your shoulders comes the arms, and after the arm comes the hand. Now that starts and initiates all this motion, and then it starts in your backswing, it starts and initiates it again down on your downswing, and then just as much as it starts in that order, it has to stop in that order. Because my pelvis then puts on the brakes, which then trunk launches over. So the great analogy, to steal one from Greg Rose, is imagine we have 4 of us in a race. I'm the pelvis. I get out first. Now what happens, if you're the trunk, you're behind me, you're going to run up, you're going to grab the back of my shirt, and you're going to pull me back, essentially putting the brakes on me, which is going to allow you to launch forward. And then the next guy in the race is your shoulders. Does the same thing. And so you have that sequence. So one launches off the next. Because if you don't brake at that same time, well, then you're just going to fly open and everything goes in one big thing. So what you should see is this spiral tornado type of effect happening in anything rotational if we do it right. That's where you lose in efficiency and you're actually utilizing this. Now, you have actually ways that you can measure this through things like 4D motion and KVAST, where they actually have sensors they'll put on your belt, put on your chest, put on your arm and your hand, where you can look at what you call your kinematic sequence, and they can see how much rotation you're getting. When is it peaking? How much is it peaking? Is it peaking in the right sequence? And is it breaking in the right sequence? And by looking at that, that is how I tell if my training is actually going to translate onto the course, or do I just have somebody who's a gym hero who stinks at golf, right? So that's where sequencing becomes incredibly important to understand and to learn. And there's certain things we can do off the course that helps feed into that type of, because that's really just teaching your nervous system how to have the right muscles work at the right time, and then just as important as that, have other stuff stay out of the way and stay off at the right time, right? So that's kind of in a nutshell what sequencing is and how you become efficient with anything rotational.
So here I asked Eric to elaborate a little bit more on what the process kind of looks like. So if, as an example, a 40-something-year-old golfer like myself were to walk in and be interested in working with him, sort of, I asked him to walk me through the process of his evaluation and that next step.
So with that, I work with people both in person, but as well as hybrid and virtually, because a lot of these things, there's some things you're never going to see a kinematic sequence and be able to get all that data with the naked eye. And so that's something, you can do, but I can interpret that information and then utilize it. But also there's a lot of things that you can see that just tell me the fundamentals of your movement. Like there's certain minimums that you should have in terms of movement before we even worry about getting into the weeds of how many degrees of pelvic rotation you have, right? We have to look at, can you even distinguish your pelvis from your trunk, right? So there's some really fundamental movement screens where I can just put you into an athletic position and say, okay, don't let your hips move, and now turn your shoulders as much as you can. Well, you watch 8 out of 10, guys in that demographic that you're talking about that are, who are not pro golfers, who are weekend warriors, who are sitting in a desk and chair all day. Now you ask them to separate their hips from their shoulders, and it doesn't. It's just one big block that moves here and here, if they even can understand and comprehend that movement strategy at all. And so let's start with that. So that's the other thing too, is what happens is I'll get golfers that come to me and they'll want to go really into the rabbit hole of really super specific golf demands of their wrist deviation and of their shoulder rotation. And it's like, well, let's back up for a second here, guy. You can't even touch your toes, right? That's where we got to start, right? So there's some fundamental human movements that if you can't do those, chasing after the golf specific ones are a fruitless path. So we have to make sure you check the boxes of just minimal human movement first. And when you're talking about that demographic, most of them don't have it. All right. So what if I do? Well, I can see a lot of those things virtually, right? I can get you on my app. I can watch you virtually, watch you move, and I can see a bunch of that stuff. Well, what if I don't even have the ability to do that? Okay. So if you're sitting there listening, saying, okay, well, where do I even start? I don't have the ability to find somebody that can do that. So there's 3 common areas where we lose our movement competency as we age and as we're more sedentary, and especially as we're bound to desks and chairs. 1 is your ankles, 2 is your hips, and 3 is your trunk and shoulders. Okay, so those are the 3 main areas. If you don't have ankle mobility and you don't have the ability to have your ankles not only move front and back, your shins to translate front and back over your ankles, but also your ability to have a little play right to left and in and out, a little torque in there. Okay, well, it's just going to feed up the chain. As I said, the whole kinematic sequence starts at your feet. So if you can't even get good footing, well, everything up the chain is going to blow up after that. Ankle mobility and making sure you have enough ankle mobility is one of the first things to have. And then with that, there's, as I said, a mobility and a stability component. A simple test: can you balance on one leg easily with your shoes off for 10 seconds? If you can't do that, you can buy the most expensive driver the store sells. It doesn't matter, right? So because you don't have any stability there in your lower body. And so that's the most fundamental thing, starting from the ground up. Now in your hips have to be able to hinge. Can you hinge properly without hinging your spine? Because that's going to be a big differentiator and not beating up your back versus loading your hips the way we should, because that's where all the money's going to get made. Can you rotate your thigh inside the hip? And then can you rotate your pelvis under your trunk, right? So that's where we look at your hip mobility as well as your control. And then we look at your trunk. Basically, imagine from your ribs up to your shoulders and everything in between. There have your middle of your spine, you have your rib cage and all that stuff that's kind of interconnected in there. Can you extend and flex that fully? Flexing, usually people kind of pull, or just gravity's winning and they just kind of fall into this crappy posture. Extending is incredibly important. If you can't reverse that and get extension in your upper back, every time you bring your arms up overhead to go into your swing, you're impinging your shoulder. Okay. And so that's going to be a huge issue. So we have to be able to extend. The big one, obviously, is we have to be able to rotate our trunk. And so how much rotation you have? Well, if you sat up nice and tall and you can cross your arms over your shoulder and you can rotate at least 45 degrees each way as a minimum, that's the starting point. If you can't, well, then you're going to have all sorts of problems. And if you know, especially when I see people who have wrist, elbow, and shoulder problems, well, if you can't rotate your trunk, you're going to get that club head back there. You've told your brain, I got to get it back here. Your coach or, his instructor's telling you got to get the club head back there. So if you can't rotate the trunk, you're just going to overreach with that shoulder and arm and just beat the hell out of it in the process. So you got to be able to rotate your trunk. Now, it's funny. I'll do the trunk rotation test with people, and they'll say, okay, was that good? And I'll say, it's good. I said, you have all the rotation you need to be an accountant. Right? If you're going to go sling a long metal shaft a couple hundred times this weekend, you're going to need a whole bunch more than that. So that's where the demands of golf exceed what the demands you need to just live a long, happy life. So that's really, those are kind of those three big areas that you got to check those boxes. And from there, then we can go a lot deeper into, all the other, minutia with it.
And here I ask Eric to sort of elaborate a little bit more about sequencing, what that is, and how that fits into golfers and the TPI specific models.
Yeah, you got to have the mobility and control to do those things. So that's sort of some really basic things that I can watch you do, and it would take me all of 10 minutes to watch you do those things to see. I can see where you're already probably have major flaws in your swing because of this. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean you're going to be a lousy golfer, right? When we evaluate and look at swing flaws, whether it's in golf, whether it's in, baseball, if we look at swing flaws, Giancarlo Stanton has tons of them, tons of inefficiencies in everything he has in his baseball swing. But you make up for a lot of those inefficiencies when you're 6'7" and 250 pounds and an absolute specimen. So there's people who have won Masters. There's people who have been very, very successful without having all these things we've talked about. The problem is they usually don't last. They break down. They get hurt quite a bit. And so we have to try to do, in terms of balancing the longevity and health of someone, we have to balance that out. And it doesn't mean we're going to completely revamp their swing. And I don't want to make a laundry list of changes to you, especially if you're in your competitive season, because again, I'm going to screw you up, right? Because you've gotten your swing that you learned with one body and one nervous system. If I give you a brand new body and nervous system next week, you're going to have a dip in your performance. So I tell people, like, the time to make major tweaks is in the winter. The time to make, and then during the season, it's do everything we can to maintain the baseline competencies that we've built and to maintain your fitness attributes that we've built, and then make major changes to your movement when you're not trying to compete and during that time.
Here we kind of shift courses a little bit in the conversation, and I start to talk with Eric about his Ageless Athlete Blueprint through Eternal Athletics, and it's through his website as well, ericdagati.com, DAGATI.com. And here he kind of explains how the Ageless Athlete Blueprint comes to be, how he sort of started to work with people more in their 40s, 50s that are still competitive athletes, and why he chose to really focus on this and actually kind of move away a little bit from the professional athletes. And at this part, I kind of tell Eric a little bit about my background and how, as a competitive amateur golfer, one of the things is, how do you balance time? You've got a full-time job. Many of you listeners have families and kids and other things that take up time in your life that don't allow you to dedicate your life to training like a professional athlete, that's their main job. And so I ask Eric basically, how does somebody like myself with a full-time job and, barely able to find the time to do all the golf training in and of itself, much less some of the fitness or flexibility in some of those other areas. And so I ask Eric, sort of what some of his advice is and suggestions are for people like us that, aren't full-time professional athletes to dedicate our lives to training.
No one I've ever trained, no world champion has ever told me, Scott, like, it was that one workout I did in 2015. That's what really got me to the top, right? It's training is cumulative. It happens over time. I always use the analogy of seeds and soil. We're planting seeds for a later harvest. You don't do a set of bicep curls and magically you have these great looking arms. You're planting seeds for later harvest. And the more you kind of tend to the soil, the more your harvest is going to bloom. So the other thing that makes this tricky, because everybody's looking for that magic, tip that they're going to overhear in the clubhouse. And that it's like a Larry David episode. They're waiting for that one magic tip that's going to change their game. If you really want to get into the weeds, there's so much complexity that we have to understand when you're dealing with the human body. Okay, we've talked about movement, we've talked about fitness and strength, and we've talked about your capacity and your aerobic system. We've talked about the actual swing mechanics. Well, what about the fact that if you show up and you had a really lousy night's sleep? Okay, if you get less than 6 hours sleep, your nervous system is completely downregulated. Nervous system is what drives everything. It's what drives your sequencing. It's what drives your power. It drives everything. So you now are not squaring up the ball as well, or you're not not hitting it as flush because you had a lousy night's sleep, or maybe because you don't have good nutrition, or maybe because you didn't give yourself a huge mistake is not giving yourself enough time to warm up. Right? You kind of hopping on one foot, putting your shoe on while you're slamming your trunk, and then you go out and play. Well, what did you expect to happen? The best players in the world are there 3 hours before they ever hit the first tee box. And you think as a weekend warrior, you're going to have the phone holding on your shoulder as you're on a phone call, putting your shoe on, and then walking up to the first tee box. You're setting yourself up for disaster. So you have to prime yourself to do this explosive event, which is a golf swing. And this one of the probably most fine motor movements of almost any sport. And you wonder why you stink. Well, there's so many of these other factors that we're not kind of putting into play, not to mention the whole rabbit hole of your mental psychology of you shank that first shot. And if you can't have the resilience and ability to manage your states and come back from that, the next 80 are in the tank. I wish it was as simple as overhearing, a tip in the clubhouse, but it doesn't work that way.
I ask Eric here a little bit about what are some of the common things that he tends to see, and usually how he tends to work with golfers at this age range.
Absolutely, and with that demographic in particular that you mentioned, it's no one, even pro athletes, none of them have ever come to me in all my 25 years of doing it and say, hey, Eric, I have all the time in the world. I have nothing else to do other than train. That's it. You have all day to do whatever you want with me. It's never happened, and I don't see it happening anytime soon. So we have to figure out, here's the thing. We have to be as efficient as possible in terms of your programming, meaning one is that there's no time for fluff. There's need to do, there's nice to do. I need to figure out the need to do. So I need to sort that out with a systematic approach, right? So I'm not guessing. That's where we sharpshoot things. And that's where the beauty of doing a really detailed assessment kind of helps take away a lot of that fluff. Two is what a lot of times we think about fitness is okay, when people think of going to the gym, a lot of what has been driven into people's heads with fitness is really biased in bodybuilding. And that I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do a leg day and I'm going to do an arm day and I'm going to do a shoulder day. And I'm going to, if you're going to go on stage in your underwear, yeah, you need to do that. But when you're swinging a club, the last thing you're thinking about is, okay, I'm going to use my hips now. I'm going to use my trunk now. I'm going to use my shoulder now. You need to be able to integrate everything. And so you need to be able to do really efficient movement-based, full body training. And if you do it right, you can knock over a lot of, you just have to know how to sharpshoot those things and make sure you're doing that. So usually there's kind of three. I always tell everybody when they start working with me, there's kind of four main buckets that we're working in. Here's what's going to be expected of you. You need to work on your movement quality. And that's as simple as what I call your movement, snacks or movement hygiene. Just like you brush your teeth for your dental hygiene. No one ever came to me and said, I'd have more time if I didn't have to do this brushing my teeth nonsense twice a day. But we do that preventatively and ahead of time so you don't break down and lose your teeth. Well, same thing with your body. So like, I'm going to give you 10, 15 minutes of things to do that are just movement based, just to restore, like we talked about, ankles and hips and knees. And I don't even care if that movement is all done consecutively, because you're just retraining the behavior of how you move. So if you did, if I gave you 6 exercises and you did 2 in the morning, 2 in the afternoon, 2 at night, and that takes you 5 to 10 minutes each, fine. Now, if you tell me you don't have 5 to 10 minutes, well, then we have a bigger problem, right? Then it's a priority problem. It's not a mobility problem or anything else. So there's that. Strength training, if we can get a minimum of twice a week and we can get somewhere from 30 to 45 minutes, we can do that really well. And we don't really need a whole lot of equipment. And if it saves you the trip of having to go to the gym, and you have a couple dumbbells and maybe a kettlebell or 2 and some bands, we can get a whole lot done and make you pretty damn athletic like that. So there's kind of your minimums there. And obviously we can go deeper into it. If I had more time, I just can do more things, but it's kind of like minimums to make a difference that surpasses what most people have. Then aerobic fitness, that's probably the most time consuming, but it could be as simple as, hey, we're going to get, again, I'm going to put it in doses kind of throughout the day to try to do whatever I can. And sometimes as simple as just like, you're going to have something that tracks your steps, and you got to hit a target number of steps throughout the day just to kind of build that base. And then the last piece is looking at your recoverability. And the big 3 with that is your stress management, your nutrition, and your sleep, and making sure that those are in order, because that's the soil that I'm planting the seeds in. Because if those 3 aren't in order, it doesn't matter how good my program is. So there's like the practical components. And if you kind of add that up, it's all doable within your schedule, but you got to make sure that it's efficient, right? You don't have time to do wrist curls, and you don't have time to do some of the more superfluous stuff that you have to just do the need to do stuff.
Here we dig in a little bit more to Eric's Ageless Athlete Blueprint program and this interactive coaching program, sort of how it works, how it came to be as well in the days of COVID.
Yeah, so obviously, when COVID hit, my world was turned upside down, as most people's were. And thankfully for me, it was just a matter of, you're going to have to figure out a different way to do this, right? Because you're not going to be able to see people in person. And so in some ways, it was somewhat of a blessing that it forced me to figure out more creative ways to deliver training. And part of that was, I went to the closed gym that nobody could come to, and I shot hundreds and hundreds of exercise videos, and then developed an app to say, okay, well, all you got to do is go on the app. It's going to have your workout for you. Hit start, and I'm going to tell you exactly what to do. I'm going to tell you how many reps, how many sets. I'm going to tell you all that stuff. And then I'm going to give you a way to log your nutrition. I'm going to give you all of it mapped out in a schedule for you. And so I created this deliverable. And then, as people started to come back, I started doing kind of hybrid back and forth, but realized that there was some magic in here. And I've always been confined to that I can only work with you if you're in the New York, New Jersey area. And so how can I expand my reach and reach more people? And then, well, okay, I'm going to have to narrow this down a little bit, because there's billions of people in the world. So who's a niche that I think could really benefit from this? Well, after a lot of back and forth and working with some business coaches, realized okay, dummy, you look in the mirror, right? You're at the time I was 50, I'm 52 now. I play competitive, baseball every Sunday. I still want to go out and be able to do the things that I want to do, still want to train as hard as I've always trained, and I don't want to hurt. And so it's like, you know what? There's a lot of me out there, right? And I started getting, ironically, the universe started bringing me a lot of those guys. And the common theme is that it was like, there's some people in my field that, oh, I need to get a trainer to get me to work out. I don't want to work out. I need a trainer to be accountable to and get me to work out. If you need that, I'm not your guy. There's plenty of really good people at that. I don't have anything to do with that. I was for the guy, I just talked to a guy today, new client who reached out to me and said, I've been training for years. I just have no plan. I have no idea what I'm doing, and it doesn't work anymore. And now I'm actually getting hurt when I work out, and that kind of defeats the purpose. He's like, I just don't know what to do. And, that guy's not going to go on social media and follow some 20-year-old, influencer with who's on steroids and has abs. So I need somebody who can relate to me, right? And so who understands what it's like to want to still be thriving in my 40s, 50s, 60s and beyond. And so that's really where I kind of came up with this idea of this Ageless Athlete Blueprint, to say, don't don't settle for the rocking chair. You don't have to. Like, I'm showing you that I do it, and I have a list of other guys that have done it. I just got a text from probably one of my most avid golfers, and he's 76. His goal is to golf his age this year. And he came to me because he was in tremendous back pain that no one could solve. And that was, probably close to a year ago. It took some time because he waited a little too long. I kind of told him the old joke from the Woody Woodpecker cartoon that if Woody would have went straight to the police, none of this would have ever happened. I said, I needed to see you 6 months ago, not today, but let's deal with it. So we were able to figure it out. And he's been playing tremendous pain-free golf all season. And he just texted me today. He shot a 77 and he's one off. And so he's getting there. And so it's like, so that, he's, as much as he's cool and I love him, he's not unique in terms of physicality, right? There's not something that says, oh, well, that's for other people. And so I can give you countless guys who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and in this case, 70s, who are still really thriving, who aren't ready to give up, right? They're not ready to do that, and nor should you. It's just, you got to be a little bit more careful and methodical, to the point that, like I said earlier, you also can't just go into like your LA Fitness and get the weekend certification trainer who's 20 years old and, has no idea what your experience is going to be like and what you have to deal with. And, the fact that you have a day job, and the fact that you may have kids, or the fact that you have other stressors, and that you don't care if you're about doing a bicep day or in your workout. Like, I need to feel good, and I'd like to look good. I want to feel really good, and I want to actually be able to do stuff. Right. And so that's really the niche that I've gravitated towards. Look, the jerseys on the wall and the big name athletes, it's really cool. And I've kind of been there and done that. And now it's like, I'm really enjoying working with people that I can really relate to, because I'm living it with them.
Here I kind of ask Eric a little bit more about, okay, is this in person? Is it online? Is it a mixture of both? And so Eric then elaborates a little bit more about the Ageless Athlete Blueprint program, and kind of how the instruction and training programs are set up and work.
Yeah, that's more or less. And then there's completely virtual programs for people that aren't in my area. There's hybrid programs, and where people maybe come see me for their initial assessment, and then they're going to do follow up on their own. Because, like I said, I'm getting people who are used to, or they're already doing fitness, they just don't know what to do. And then from there, we check in on whatever regularity works for you. Whether it's I have some people I see on a weekly basis, some people I see on a monthly basis, just to kind of keep them in check. Because if this thing works, and it does, we're going to need to update that program in a month. And also because life happens. And so I'm not going to train you the same, Scott, when you got a tournament, huge tournament next month, as I would in December when you're not playing golf at all. And so that's why the adaptations happen. So, on my website, you'll see a link to Eterno Athletics is where we have that program. And, you just send me a message and I can get you all the information through there.
And here I just ask Eric to share where people can find him if they are interested in that program, or speaking engagements as well.
Yes. Yeah. Eric Dagati. It's just my name, EricDagati. And then what I also put on there is because I, in the last few years, I've been doing a lot of these type of speaking engagements, whether it's podcasts or speaking at conferences and so forth. And the challenge, the beauty of this medium is I get to touch people that I would never get to speak with, that are in your audience. And so that's why I'm always grateful to get these opportunities. But the only downside of this is that, no one can raise their hand right now and say, hey, Scott or Eric, what do you mean by that? So since I do so much of this, I added a section on my homepage. It's called Ask Eric. So if you want to just ask a question, anything related to fitness training, health, performance, just ask that. That goes direct to my email. And then I'll get back to you, within, a day or two. And if I don't have the answer, I'll at least send you someplace that does.
Here I kind of joked with Eric. So he came to me and said, I work with a lot of golfers, and with TPI and things like that, I'm very much involved with golfers, but as a golfer himself, he's not necessarily the best. And, he sort of shares that a little bit in the upcoming areas. But I basically tell him I'm about to put him in the hot seat. And so I ask him for the first question with sort of our quick hit that those of you that listen to my episodes usually hear at the very end of the episode. So these kind of quick hits on golf. I ask him what his sort of favorite or best golf memory is.
Probably I golfed on the day of my wedding, which was like freaking everybody out. They're like, "How could you golf? Like, how you?" I'm like, "Okay, the wedding's at 4 o'clock. I'm going golfing at 9." He said, I'm bad. I'm not that bad. I think I could be done by at least by noon." So I golfed on the day of my wedding. It was actually a gorgeous day. And that's probably one of my golf stories. The other one probably would be being an admittedly terrible golfer, and just because I don't get a chance to play as much, is I was playing one day. It was one of these courses where, and I wish I could remember the name, but it's a course in New Jersey where the 18 hole was down from the clubhouse. So there was a huge group of an outing, just got off a bus, and they're watching the whole. And I have a putt that's probably, I don't know, 30, 40 feet. And I somehow miraculously, like the golf gods that keep you coming back, I hit this thing. I sink this thing. And this entire outing, it gives me a standing round of applause. I felt like I won the Masters. Little do they know, like that was the finish of like a 118 that I got that day. But as far as they knew, I was the greatest putter on the course that day. For anybody that was watching in that group, I shot a 75, but everybody who was in my foursome knows that was like a 125.
Here I had a really witty joke that just obviously didn't make it about being having those great shots on the 18th green, but there you have it.
Yes. And that's how they get you to coming back.
For the next question, I ask Eric, all right, you've got your dream foursome. Who are the other three people that would join you in your round of golf?
So I get to play with three other guys. So I'm going to say Tiger's a layup, right? Because of his success, but also like the whole time I'm with him, I'm not like doing the, asking a million golf questions. I'm just watching him. Like when you do what I do, you watch people in the airport and you're like, that guy's got a bad right shoulder. And you watch them, you see him walking, you could see people like in the mall and you're like, I wonder what that guy did to his left knee. And by how he moves. So I want to just watch him move through 18 holes. So that just because he's had such a checkered physical history, and see kind of like what's going on here, that he's got such a battered and beaten up body, and how is he still doing this, and what kind of compensation is he doing? So that's an easy one. Another one, I guess, selfishly from the physical standpoint, is I want guys who are like super into utilizing everything we've talked about. Like John Rahm is a guy who's an absolute physical specimen. I actually am good friends with a guy who does train him. And so like seeing that up close would be very cool to see. Or even DeChambeau, like I know he gets very into like the sports science stuff. So like that would be me geeking out and seeing, okay, what's the physical attributes that are making these people what they are, and what's that checklist, so I can kind of geek out on that sort of stuff. So I'm not looking at it from any of the golf side of things. I'm just totally like oddly staring at their bodies and how they move and how they're accomplishing things and how they warm up and what is their pre-shot routine, and all of that kind of stuff is really what is going to fascinate me.
Since Eric has some ties into baseball, and he also had mentioned he plays in some adult ball leagues, I figured this was sort of a softball question, sort of tossed up for him, but actually it was not quite the softball. But I asked him what would be your walk-up song if you had one to the first tee on the golf course to hype you up.
That's a good question. I think you might have stumped me. Well, in my 35 and over league that we play at 9 a.m. on Sunday, they don't have walk-up songs. We're lucky if we get the ump to show up at those games. So I never really got to the level where I got walk-up songs. They predate when I played in high school, and I never played at a level beyond that had a walk-up song. My music taste goes all over the place. So I can go from an old school hip hop song like Rock Superstar from Cypress Hill, which has a cool intro, to like as a 52-year-old, coming back to playing baseball 25 years later, Back in the Saddle by Aerosmith might be a cool intro. And so I could have a bunch of different ones. The beauty of if I, I'm actually decent enough at baseball that I get 4 or 5 at bats and I hit high in the lineup. So I can have a couple different ones if I can mix those up.
And here I just asked Eric for his sort of final closing remarks, if there's anything else he wanted to add. And I also mentioned again that if people want to find him, ericdagati.com, ericdagati.com, and that's where people can find him for speaking engagements, Ageless Athlete Blueprint, through Eternal Athletics, which is his interactive coaching program for active and competitive males over 40. So I asked him for his final thoughts.
No, I really appreciate the opportunity. And, the closing line, I always tell all my golfers, like I have a guy coming in tomorrow and I know he's got a tournament this weekend. As all my golfers walk out after their session, I always tell them the same thing. Say, remember, if you do really, really well, it's because of me. And if you don't, it's because you suck at golf. So that's my disclaimer. Absolutely. Awesome.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining in on today's episode. I know that it might have been a little bit different than the standard format. I hope I never have to do this again. Going back and re-recording and working with the editing team to get this all filled in and hopefully as accurate of questioning as possible. If anything was a little off as far as question and answer, I sincerely apologize, but I hope that you did enjoy Eric as much as I did. It truly was an awesome conversation that we had, and really enjoyable. And I know he's just filled with so much wisdom, and like he offers, you can always reach out to him on his website and ask any questions through his website. Great guy, great guest, and I hope some of you will end up sharing your experiences if you do end up working with Eric. I'd love to have you on as well to hear just sort of how you have found your experiences in working with Eric. So thank you. I appreciate you all tuning in. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Good Walk Spoiled. Sorry that it also is coming out, sort of a few hours later than normal here, but hopefully well worth the wait and you enjoy this episode. Thanks so much. Have a great day. Thanks for listening. Subscribe, like, go check out ericdagati.com, and we'll catch you on the next episode.
Thanks again.
That concludes today's episode of A Good Walk Spoiled, Adventures in Golf, hosted by Scott Ponywaz. That's myself. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to like, subscribe, rate it high, and follow us on Instagram at pony_golf to stay in the loop. We'll catch you next time.